So I'm going to dive right in and explore the commingled histories in Roger Brown's bedroom. An arc of art, cultural, and personal histories can be gleaned in the carefully arranged artworks and objects in this room. Things he surrounded himself with in the most intimate setting of the bedroom reveal Brown's Alabama and genealogical roots, histories of slavery in the South, histories of descendants of enslaved peoples through the works of African American craftspeople and self-taught artists, and associations with the slave trade through objects from West Africa, with Brown's artworks, those of his brother and his friends, woven into the broader historical narratives in this dense arrangement. By way of introduction, for those of you unfamiliar with the Roger Brown Study Collection, it's a house museum, archive, and special collection of the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. The second floor and two stairways of this two-story 1888 brick storefront are preserved as Brown arranged the space, in his words, as an artist's museum. With a melange of artwork and objects, I'm gonna blast through this here, from many cultures and genres, installed in visual and associative conversations from room to room. In the bedroom, Brown distilled a remarkable range of histories through objects that carry them into a kind of microcosmic constellation of relationships, from the collective cultural to the deeply personal. Through Brown's selection and arrangement of objects, he created an emotionally charged place that reminded him, through every angle and view, of his place in historical and perhaps psychic space and time. And here I'd like to acknowledge Wendy's insights of Hopper's bedroom yesterday that were also very inspiring. Occupying the center of the room, the bed is layered with fabrics, noticeably the quilt with one of the variations of the classic log cabin pattern, a pattern that became popular in 1863 when the Union Army was raising money for the Civil War efforts by raffling quilts. There was a strong symbolic association with Abraham Lincoln and the log cabin in these quilts, and Brown's ancestors on both sides of his family sided with the Union Army, even though they were in the Deep South. Dennis Adrian described the bed, and by extension, the quilts, which are made as bed coverings, as the place of birth and death and sleep and dreams. With artworks hanging on the wall above the pillows, I realized Brown couldn't even sit up in bed and read. It was a place for sleep and dreams. And it was here that Brown's love and life partner of 12 years, architect George Veranda, died of lung cancer in 1984. To the right of the bed, or to the left if you're lying in it, which I've never done in 21 years, stands the pie safe from Roger Brown's grandmother Brown's weathered, clapboard cottage in Providence Community, Alabama, where Roger and his parents lived briefly when he was quite young, before moving to Opelika, Alabama. Brown called this his genealogy cabinet. He wrote, "In 1969, before Roots by Alex Haley made genealogy a national hobby, I began a quest to trace my family history. Tracking his ancestors through space and time was to occupy Brown for nearly 30 years. He had a hand-tinted photograph of William Jackson Owsley, a relative through the Brown side of the family, given to Roger by his grandmother because it was yellowed and she knew he would take care of it." The pie safe preserves photos and objects such as a cloth-bound family Bible, the naval band and umbilical cord from his great-grandfather's birth, his baby shoe with his Aunt Iva's notes tucked into it, among family photographs and many other keepsakes. And I'll mention here that if you think of an artist giving a whole home and collection to an institution, they might clean out some things like the naval band and so forth. Roger didn't edit anything out. On the floor next to the pie safe is a beam Brown rescued from the old John Palmer cabin, built in 1784 for ancestors on Brown's mother's side of the family, when the house was in derelict condition and apparently couldn't be saved. When relative humidity rises, this beam infuses the room with a rich, woody aroma. In 1990, Brown was well into his career, and he looked back to his ancestral history in several paintings, including Old John Palmer Homestead on Buffalo Creek near the confluence of the Broad and Pacolet Rivers, north of Union, South Carolina, Slave Boy Rides a Deer, and Indian Steals the Livestock. Brown often gave works titles as long as it took to describe the painting's nuances, and that's, of course, where that beam came from. By 1990, Brown was known for narrative works addressing a range of subjects, from searing social and political works, paintings addressing religion and sexuality in many guises, popular culture, the art world, landscapes and nature, the nexus of nature and culture, the weather, and particularly clouds as the larger backdrop for the human endeavor below, among many other subjects. At this moment, he looks back to the vernacular architecture of Alabama and the South in ancestral homes of the types utilized by my forefathers: shotgun, dog trot, slab end, log houses. A baseline for considering Roger Brown's life in art, his collecting and placemaking, which were inextricably commingled, was his ardent determination to ignore, or if possible, eradicate what he considered irrelevant boundaries between the vernacular and the academically informed. Given the chance, he would celebrate or champion the vernacular. Like he did here, he wanted people to know about these modest and practical dwellings. I wonder what the art world thought when these paintings came out. But he wanted them to know about them before they disappeared, as he suggests here in his painting Ghosts, just showing the fireplaces. So, back to the bedroom. A centrifugal moment in the room is the striking painting of a horse and mule by Bill Traylor. Born into slavery circa 1853, Traylor survived life as an enslaved person for 12 years, then the years of Reconstruction, the terrors of the Jim Crow South, and about the worst his country served up. Until late in life, as a homeless man in Montgomery, Alabama, he began to draw and paint. His spectacular, if improbable, body of work, including this drawing, was recently celebrated in the exhibition Between Worlds, The Art of Bill Traylor at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. Moving around the room, to the right of the genealogy cabinet, a shelf holds 19 ceramic vessels and objects made by the Jerry Brown Pottery in Hamilton, Alabama, northern Alabama. Jerry Brown was no relation to Roger Brown, but Roger was born in Hamilton, and he loved pottery and ceramic objects of all types, and he may have wanted works made from the earth where he began his life, close at hand in the bedroom. And there's also a Jerry Brown piggy bank on the bedside table. To the right of the shelf with ceramics, a cotton basket redolent of slave labor hangs next to a shelf with large ceramic vessels, two of which date to pre-Civil War from the Edgefield district of South Carolina. The Edgefield district is known as the region where many enslaved people who were highly skilled potters lived and worked. On the shelves behind are sweetgrass baskets from coastal Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, made by descendants of enslaved peoples, and one of the oldest crafts of African origin in the United States. The closet below contains Brown's shirts, slacks, and jackets, alongside his partner, George Veranda's military uniforms from when he was a lieutenant in the Navy during 5 years of the Vietnam War. While these garments never shared the closet space, we brought them together posthumously. And Wanda, I wish I could show you these garments into the closet, but alas, there is no time. This is a really quick tour through the bedroom. In 1989, on a trip to West Africa, Brown was able to experience a point of embarkation for enslaved African people. He wrote in his journal, "We took the ferry to the island of Goree, where the slaves were shipped out. The island is just as it was then, with colonial stucco buildings in muted pinks and ochres. The original building stands at the edge of the water, where victims of the slave trade were kept." In this historically charged area of the room, Under the cotton basket is a painting by Brown's younger brother, Greg, and under that, a carving by the African-American self-taught artist Elijah Pierce, a barber from Columbus, Ohio. The study collection contains 56 works by African-American self-taught artists, including several works by the Alabama-born artist William Dawson, who later worked in Chicago and whom Brown championed. Several figural sculptures by Dawson are pictured on the right on the shelf next to the bed. Is that yellow piece of paper the 1 hour warning? Just kidding.
5 hour/5 minute warning.
And directly across the room are several objects acquired from his trip to West Africa in 1989, including the sculpture on the upper left. Brown recounted that the group he traveled with to West Africa included mostly rapacious, competitive collectors who bought objects throughout the trip, including a particular scrum for masks that were sold in the hotel lobby. He parodied this in his painting African Hotel, which shows a contemporary tourist hotel in the shimmering Senegalese heat, with tourists in the windows doing touristy things. The window on the upper right features a figure, perhaps a self-portrait, holding this particular object. The narrative comes full circle in 8 paintings by Brown from 1967 to 1969 near the ceiling and then below next to the bed, made in the years when he hit his stride and began his career as a serious professional studio artist. He was still in undergraduate and graduate school at the time. Above his bed, he hung, perhaps as a muse, a beguiling drawing by his dear friend Barbara Rossi, and a Benin fawn applique above that. The 2 imposing monoprints of exaggerated facial expressions were made by Brown's friend, the artist Robert Gordy, who died in 1986 at age 52 of AIDS, a fate Brown and Gordy shared, although Brown lived longer and died of AIDS a few weeks before his 57th birthday in 1997. Many people appoint their bedrooms with pleasantries and choose to rest among objects that soothe and calm. Brown chose to rest among memories of his immediate family and more distant ancestors, to be surrounded by difficult histories, by works of art that inspired, and by the complexities inherent in a life lived. At the end of the day, he emptied his pockets of change and took his place in bed in this densely charged space. We do our best to interpret this tapestry of artistic and cultural connections in tours and conversations with artists, students, scholars, and other guests. And I'd say we do that as best we can. We have way too many histories in every area of the collection to deal with. And I'd like to close by saying that how interesting it is for me to be here representing one of the youngest and most recent artists in this consortium, but also knowing how Brown so deeply admired and in many instances was very directly informed by artists who are represented in HAHS, by Georgia O'Keeffe, Grant Wood, Edward Hopper, Winslow Homer, Charles Birchfield, Charles Demuth, and Rockwell Kent, and probably many others that I don't know about. So I think this is another example of the kinds of interconnections that exist in HAHS, and thank you very much.